So by now it's clear. Looking back fondly on childhood, it's natural. Collecting things from our past helps us create our identity and reminds us who we are. It helps us feel whole and makes us feel more connected with others and ourselves. But if nostalgia is about childhood, then what about people who connect to eras that they've never even experienced? Is this a trend? Can't host with tight hips. Take it from me.
Our shop caters almost specifically to a young clientele.
Say 25 to 35 in that age group.
University students, people in their first apartment. I've got quite a few dealers that are under 30 years old.
These are what you'd almost consider digital natives.
We live in an interesting time where it's all available at your fingertips.
It's easier than ever to find that hidden stuff.
Or yeah.
Those hidden
Do you
gems.
remember that song that had that lyric? Google, oh, there's that song, let's listen to it 10 times in a row.
Yeah, exactly.
How technology goes today, they need something to balance that, so they're balancing it with simpler things.
A lot of people want to go against the grain.
Polaroids, tape players, record players. I've watched them try and push the numbers through the holes on the rotary dial, not knowing how to actually operate it.
These people that think, we're going back to our roots, or, we're doing what our parents did.
It seems like today's pop culture gets increasingly plastic and prefabricated.
I'm not sure if the fetishization of some of this analog technology is rebellion or just sort of fascination with the stuff.
It's this weird cyclical, just like the kids buying $40 records now is like what I used to buy $40 CDs for back then.
It seems to be that there's a lot more, so like whether that's Twin Peaks coming back, which is 90s, the X-Files, they just announced that they were going to reboot Rocko's Modern Life. Did you read about that? Oh man, I'm pumped. And then people are like, why are they doing this? It's because there's people like me who are like, I'm super pumped that you're gonna bring this cartoon back.
And then you've got the kind of Brooklyn hipster thing of dressing up in a suit from the 1920s and riding a penny farthing or what have you. Like it just seems like there's no end to the amount of stuff you can uncover and graft yourself onto.
When I met him, he had a 1930 Model A Ford, so way back then I knew what I was getting into. But somebody had painted on the side of it with a paintbrush, a wide paintbrush. Ford really goes. And his father had a red and white 58 Meteor, was it? A new one. And I used to just pray that he would bring that to pick me up and not this other lovely thing. Anyway.
But the Model A had the Armstrong here.
Sometimes, yeah.
It's better to work with.
So it goes way back to that, yeah.
Yeah, so you had an idea, okay.
Yes, I did. Yeah. And he was 10 minutes late for our wedding because he was polishing the car.
Got to line up your priorities.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so there. Proper thing. Eh?
Retro periods kind of happen in a 20-year span.
These things will always be coming and going.
There's always that rose-colored glasses kind of effect that things were better in the past.
Our parents or others may describe it as a very idealistic time.
If you're not there, you don't remember what it was really like.
The way that it's even portrayed in the media.
Basically, all you're seeing over time is the highlights of that period.
It's revisionist history. If I was around in the 70s, I would only listen to the Ramones, the Clash, Black Sabbath. I wouldn't have been into anything that my parents were into.
When I was a kid, the 50s was huge.
American Graffiti was put out in the 70s, but it's all about the 50s. And Happy Days came out in the 70s, it's all about the 50s.
The 50s were also about, atom bomb tests and the House Un-American Activities Committee that was putting people on the blacklist and for, having certain political views.
There's so much stuff now that owes so much to psychedelic rock from the 60s.
The 60s, people think of Woodstock, but they forget about the Vietnam War and the fact that you could be sent overseas to fight at a moment's notice.
Or like stadium rock of the 70s.
The 70s is the same way. You know, think of disco and new wave, but there's also Watergate and more Vietnam War.
Now it's like the 80s, 90s, you know, that are kind of the age that everyone's really interested in.
We're both really big pop music fans, like top 40 kind of pop, and you know, the queen for us is Carly Rae Jepsen, and her whole new record was just
80s.
pure 80s.
Even the 80s, you know, a lot of the stuff, you know, Nicaragua and the Contra scandal, that stuff all sort of gets forgotten, and people just think about Flock of Seagulls. But there's also the, you know, kind of a dark side and a scary side to any one of these periods.
This music was, you know, came out originally on vinyl. So, you know, if you want to be a little more authentic, you'll capture the sound of the warm vinyl, analog sound with that.
If somebody walks in like, why vinyl? I'll just be like, this is why vinyl, and I'll play it, and they'll be like, I get it. You know, once you kind of like expose them and you can hear it, and you can show them why this is something that they should spend the money on and it's worthwhile. If you're a real music fan and you want to get the most out of it, having, you know, just hearing it, I feel, is enough for 90% of the people to be like, ah, I get it. Pressing to vinyl is the most, you know, almost like pure form. Instead of being in the studio, it's just like, it's that direct, because when, you know, you cut it off the high range and the low range for CDs, then you have to compress it even further for an MP3, and then, but this is like the best way to listen to the full range of highs, lows, and everything in between.
They sure don't make it like they used to. From the 30s through the 70s, there was so much pride in expression and development of product. The chrome, the shine, the curves, where today is such a plastic world.
I kind of get sickened a little by like mass consumer culture.
I hate the idea of going into the mall and like doing the whole fast fashion thing. It's so much more money on something that's not going to last you as long. And it's also not as special. It doesn't have that sort of wow factor to it.
I believe that vintage clothing is a unique approach to fashion. Obviously, I wasn't alive in the 20s. I have no reason to be nostalgic about this 1920s dress. However, having like a very special thing instead of just accumulating tons and tons and tons of cheap stuff that you're just gonna wear once and throw away, I'm nostalgic for those days that don't exist anymore, sadly.
A lot of stores sell vintage replicas, and I just think, why wouldn't you just buy the real thing that's like amazing materials, super good quality, and potentially still works?
I was just in an H&M, and they had like a Marilyn Manson shirt that was brand new, but it was clearly sort of poised to reflect like the grunge era. It was distressed on the collar, like purposefully, you know, and it was like real long. Marilyn Manson is still putting out records, and I still buy them, but H&M is selling his like vintage tees. It's a weird thing.
Old things, I mean, they're still around here after 100 years. You know, there's got to be something good about them. There's not too many things today that are being produced that will be there in 100 years. So some of these things will still be, I imagine.
You can take a vintage skirt and put it with a staple piece or a classic blazer and be trendy, be vintage, be on point, right? All in one look.
As long as it's taken care of, there's no reason why it can't last forever, really.
Memories, they make us smile, don't they? Yes, it's always easy to look back and smile, until it isn't. What happens if the smile never comes? What happens if despite all the things you covet, collect, and bring into your life, the hole remains? What happens if you get stuck? Well then, my friends, nostalgia is powerful, they say. And as you know, power in the wrong hands can quickly turn to mind control. What happens when nostalgia goes dark?
Nostalgia and how you may experience it really depends on how you look at the past. And there's one study by Svetlana Boym. She identified two main types of nostalgia. Restorative, where you reflect on the memories and then try and recreate them. And the other one would be reflective, where you savor the memories without that expectation. So if you get too stuck in trying to restore memories that can never be, that's when it can lead to problems, in that you may experience some negative feelings. You're realizing that there's a time that you've idealized that you may never get back.
Thanks to reality television, I discovered that I am what's termed a late stage 3 hoarder.
My parents and I sort of jokingly call me a hoarder.
I had, like 6 storage units full of stuff and 2 households just packed with things.
I don't collect garbage, but I'm not just collecting clothing. I'm collecting everything else as well.
Hoarding is basically an over-attachment to an object that if it brings about a time that maybe you're not able to recreate, and they experience too much discomfort when they think about discarding of that item.
The first time I sold something, once we got the shop up and running, it was like having a child ripped from my arms.
If I was selling everything, I have a lot of stock. I have overstock, but as everything isn't being sold, I just have a really full bedroom.
The second thing, not quite so traumatic. Third, fourth, not that bad, and then it kind of eased into it. It's more exciting selling the stuff now. It's almost like catch and release, I can get the hoarder, feed the hoarder by buying something, and then kind of get a new endorphin rush from selling it. I can't speak for someone who isn't a hoarder, but as a hoarder, collecting, sort of going off the rails to the piling up of stuff, it can get out of control really fast, and I mean really fast.
If you would have asked me 10 years ago when I purchased my first item of vintage if I was going to have so much, I would have said, no way. I'm not going to collect that much. I'm not going to be one of those people that just has stuff everywhere. But I don't really see me stopping buying things.
$700, one auction, you could have like an entire cube van load of stuff. What are you going to do with it? That's already out of control. Nostalgia is power. You can use nostalgia as a tool to influence people.
Like probably in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, people were getting sold nostalgia and didn't really catch on to it, but now it's so clearly obvious that they're being sold nostalgia, but everyone still falls for it.
It elicits such warm feelings in people that then to associate something else with that kind of, you're basking in the afterglow of something, trying to attach it to it. And it can be easily abused, as it is being abused in the United States currently. This idea of hearkening back to make America great again, it's like, when exactly, where, what idealized yesterday are they talking about? It didn't exist. If they're looking for sort of a Little House on the Prairie existence, it was on TV. It's not real. John Wayne was an actor, not an actual cowboy.
People, they feel things and then you've got them.
It's making people feel good. If they feel good and it's associated with your product, you're more likely to buy it.
It's almost like they can't help because that's a response from the heart rather than from the mind. If it's not nostalgia for someone, it's not worth as much. 40 years down the road, this 70s, 80s, 90s stuff will be worth not half as much as it is right now again.